Hi, I'm Simon Tomes from TestBuddy. TestBuddy helps testers manage and share their testing notes. Start a free 14-day trial today. Welcome to today's episode of Conversations on Exploratory Testing. And today, I got to chat with Al Goodall. Al is a lead software quality analyst at Workforce Software. He's currently involved in a project for a unified scheduling solution. You can find Al on Twitter, and do go check out his Test Ninja blog. During today's conversation, we discuss why Al and his team moved from step tests to exploratory testing, how automation and an exploratory approach work in balance. We also explore personas and how they influence where to focus efforts. So Al, hello, and welcome to this conversation on exploratory testing. I'm super excited because I think you and I have got lots to talk about when it comes to exploratory testing, and there's some very interesting topics I think that we can cover today. So first of all, how are you doing?
I'm really well, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I think that with the COVID situation and working from home, we're making it work for us. So, yeah, looking forward to talking about some of the topics that we've raised.
Glad to hear things are working out given the current challenges we have right now, for sure. So thinking in terms of exploratory testing, of course, there's plenty of places we could start. But one interesting thing that you've shared with me off this call is a transition that yourself and your teams have gone through from a stepped-based testing approach to an exploratory testing approach. And I think it's certainly something that a lot of teams can go through and experience different things as part of that process. So, yeah, I would love to get some of your or if you're open to sharing some of your experiences of moving from step tests to exploratory testing.
Absolutely. Cool. So part of our journey within Workforce has been this move from having stepped tests where we had a lot of time spent creating these tests that would unfortunately age after a sprint or so. So you build a feature, you invest a lot of time in some 20 or 30 step tests, and then by the next sprint, you're having to discard those, amend those, remove those, because either they were fit for purpose then, but they're not fit for purpose now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we recognized from previous topics was that we could use exploratory testing alongside creating step tests in the form of Gherkin to allow us to do, so we can do, where we want to do step tests, we will write that as Gherkin. And where we want to do exploratory testing to cover browser accessibility or other items of interest, the exploratory testing framework and the way that you create a charter lends itself really nicely to that. I suppose one of the things with step tests is that there's no real freedom in that you are locked in to a path. Do this, assert that, do this, assert that, do this, assert that. Oh, look, you're done. We move on to the next one. And in some cases, there's value there. So you might think that for a lightweight sanity test that anybody could run, you want that level of it being locked down. But for QAs being the kind of naturally curious people that we are, we want the ability to, for want of a better word, follow your nose.
Yeah, totally. That's a great way of framing it.
That area is interesting. I'm looking at this story. That area is interesting. Let's put something in around that. Let's put an exploratory test in. Let's get a charter together. Let's get our focus areas, in place, and let's explore that area, because I think there's risk there, or I think that could produce some interesting output for product, for example.
Yeah.
So, but moving from one to the other, it's not just a step change, pardon the pun.
Yeah, love it.
So it's not just a step change where you just go, yeah, we're not going to do step tests anymore, we're just going to do exploratory. We went through a couple of stages where we were doing step tests along, and for some tests we would add an exploratory in, and then we went to for one story in your team's commit, do exploratory, and then on to now it's just exploratory. So there were a couple of stages that we went through. And a couple of items, an interesting item came out where when we were moving from step test to exploratory, obviously with exploratories, it's all about the focus area. And you want that. So you have a focus area or a series of focus areas, and you give yourself a bit of structure by going, these are the only things that we're going to look at in this exploratory. And I know I suffered from it originally, where I would just put all my focus areas into the one exploratory test. And of course, the output of my exploratory was, I need more exploratory tests. I can't execute all this in half an hour.
Yeah, totally.
It's an impossible task, right? So what we want, where I am currently now in my journey is that I'm looking at my tests that I want to do, and I'm carving it up into, well, there's an area, there's an area, there's an area, and there's an area. So where I would have one or two gigantuan step tests, I now have 4, 5, 6 exploratory tests covering the same kind of thing, which is great.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
One of the things with exploratory tests, it's the focus, and just focusing on that little bit rather than trying to take it all in one go, where you come to the end and you think, well, what did I miss? Have I missed anything? And with this, if you could just focus on a little bit at a time, the picture builds up and you get this map of the feature kind of, like you're an explorer. The map of the feature unfurls before you.
I love that.
As you build each bit out, and you find out where things interrelate. So, yeah.
That conjures a wonderful image of you kind of revealing parts of a map that you haven't yet discovered. Reminds me of some of those old games like, I don't know, Civilization, where you'd move to an area that was yet to be discovered and it would reveal a few tiles and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I always thought about it, and now you're mentioning games, I always thought about it like I used to be big for those real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
Where
classic.
It was like the fog of war.
Yes.
Where you had the bit that you could see, and then there was the rest of the map, which was unseen until you actually went there to find out what was going on.
Yeah. That is exploratory testing, right? But having the structure that you described, where you kind of you take a punt earlier on and say, these are, the example you gave, my 5 focus areas. Now I'm going to limit myself to a certain time or a time box for that particular focus area and reveal useful information. And what I find useful about that kind of just focus on this particular thing. And it's really difficult because particularly if you find something you're like, oh, that's interesting, you kind of like have to tell yourself to stop. Go, no, we'll come back to that another time. That's a useful thing that we could explore. But that's where I love the time boxing part of it, where you will get to go again. You'll get to run another session. You could get 3 or 4 sessions done in a day. But finishing the session, then sharing it with someone else and getting that feedback, you're like, actually this changes the focus area for the next ones. Like, we do actually need to focus on this in a bit more detail. So you can kind of go bit more deeper on that particular focus area if it's important, if it's revealing useful risks that are kind of, if it's like created a few more questions or there's a few more unknowns where you're like, oh yeah, we need to go find out some more. So that the way you described that discipline of a focus area is really powerful, and it's hard. I think it's a hard thing to do because as you shared, like you kind of, you want to try and cover and you want to answer that question, have I done enough? And you, I think as testing professionals, we worry about that, like, oh, there could just be that other thing that I haven't found yet and I'm worried about it. Yet this time boxing, small focus areas, I think gives us that chance of just having another go, and it being small enough that we can just go again, and that's fine. And maybe we go again in a couple of days, but that's kind of okay, you know.
Yeah, I go along with that. The interesting thing with the way that you can maintain a focus is that you can build it out to suit the use cases that you want to prove. So what am I trying to prove here? And I know we talked about the use of personas in exploratory testing, where you're looking at your focus areas, you're trying to look at who's going to be using this and what persona am I adopting for this particular charter. So am I always, for example, am I always a manager, or am I always a supervisor? Am I always an employee?
Yeah.
I always kind of like the fun ones where you're doing a test where as an employee you're doing one thing and the manager is moderating it and the employee is seeing the results. So you've got this interaction between two personas where you have, well, I'm the employee now. What do I see? What do I do? Then I'm the manager now. So what am I doing as the manager here for this employee? And then the reverse. So I've done this thing as the manager. Now, as the employee, what do I now see? What's different to what's happened before? So there's this interplay between, it's not just I'm always, in some cases, I'm always manager, or I'm always doing, or I'm always a scheduler, and I'm always doing this one thing, and there's never any downstream effect. But then you also have, sometimes with features, you have an interplay between one or more actors where somebody's doing something and that has, there's a cause there, and then there's, here's how it manifests itself and what do I do there? So I think it's important that when we're talking about, our focus areas and how we're structuring it out, that the personas that we're thinking of have quite a major part to play in that, because after all, these are going to be the people that use our software.
Yeah.
I mean, I use our software every day, but I'm not the customer.
Yes.
We have personas of people who have roles within their company that see different things and do different things, and also sometimes have different levels of experience.
Yes, yeah.
Not everybody is as, you sometimes have people who just use their phone, or just use a tablet, or just are in an office and just use the desktop. So there's personas of use and personas of role as well.
Yeah. And that kind of, I guess I'd describe it as a layer of complexity that has an impact on your exploratory testing efforts, but plays in really well to your focus areas. And what I like about that is, with the use of personas, tying it back to your customers, like literally, like what problems is your thing that you're testing trying to solve for your customers? What value is it trying to bring to them? And then using value to then think about risk, as in things that would threaten the value of the stuff that is important to those different personas. And I
Yeah,
wonder,
very much so. Yeah.
I'm curious to because I think tying that back to the transition from step tests to exploratory testing, what sort of was there anything around like how you map the value of exploratory testing? So given let's step back in time to where your company was using step tests and it was just the normal thing, and I'll make an assumption that perhaps you were reporting on certain metrics like test cases run or pass fail rates perhaps. What was it like for, say, leadership who are slightly who I would say are removed from, or perhaps a level removed from the day-to-day nitty-gritty of product development? What was their perception of like, oh, what's this exploratory testing thing? Like, what does that mean? How's that going to work? Given we're used to you giving us these test reports that tell us about step tests. How was that?
That's an interesting point. I can't really speak for the leadership, but I can cite a couple of examples of a project I was on where I had to run a report for the project manager where I was basically, for each test, I had a number of test cases for each feature that we were delivering. And I had to say at the end of, I think, was it every day or every other day? I can't remember. How many I'd run, how many bugs I'd found, and was it complete or not? So, or roughly where we were. But it was a case of, and I sometimes felt like I was reporting on the fact that I was reporting.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
And
yeah,
that was, I accepted that as that was a requirement of the project. That was what the customer was really keen to know, that we were on top of things. And this was how we were representing that. But it was a lot of, it felt like a lot of work, when actually perhaps if it was a bit more periodical, not necessarily every day, but every week, we were able to show a bit more value. But in regards to the value of exploratory testing, I think there's long been I think it's taken, I'm not sure if it's taken a while or not, but there's a lot of recognized value around it. And sometimes I think with step tests, all you're concerned with is, does it work or not?
Yes.
Does that make sense? Where it's more along the lines of, well, if I can put a tick in this box, then it's all right.
Yes.
But who am I saying it's all right for? Me? The customer? Who? So when we're saying that we're putting a tick in the box, it was along the lines, or we're saying that step test has passed. Who are we considering it for? I mean, in some cases, it's obvious. Oh, it's for the schedulers are doing this, so that's who we're interested in making sure it works for. Great.
Yeah.
But with exploratory testing, I think that there's more of a story to be told, where I'm telling a story. I'm telling a story about a scheduler, and a scheduler is going to go and do this thing, and it's going to affect his employees. And further down the story, further through this story, we've got this: the employee comes along and looks at this thing and goes, "That's really interesting," and interacts with it in such a way that feeds back up the ladder. And I think it tells. I want to say it tells a better story.
Yeah, I love that. That's
and
a great way of describing it.
shows a flow of, we do this, and as this person, and this is where it's going, and then as this other actor, this is where how it's manifesting itself as it sort of information heads the other way.
That's a great way of framing it, and it makes me think about like just ticking a box to say this test case was okay, or this set of group of step tests were okay. It's just like real surface level stuff when I think of it in the terms that you described it, where through exploratory testing we go much deeper, and we can go as deep as we want and as wide as we want, whereas like a step test is just a tiny little blip and doesn't really tell us the whole story. So I love the way you described it, as exploratory testing is a powerful way to tell a story about the thing or things that you've been exploring.
Yeah.
It's
I
great.
mean, I should say that, yeah, you could do the same thing with Gherkin, which could dovetail really nicely with exploratory testing as well, where you can go, you know, as a scheduler, I do this, you know, so when I do this, so I'm a scheduler and I log in. When I do this, then my employee sees that.
Mm.
And you're kind of putting roles to things. And you can do that in Gherkin, and you can do it in exploratory testing.
Yeah.
With step tests, you would have to establish it all the way back at the outset. But when you're chugging through 30 odd steps, you're just do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. Right, okay. Assert here, assert. Right, done. And does it? I mean, it's purely my opinion, but I think that certainly the exploratory testing along with Gherkin really does lend itself to that user focus that increasingly customers are more discerning about how things work, what software looks like, what's a good experience, what's a bad experience, and that the personas in there helps build that picture out of usage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that approach just helps us have better conversations with those who aren't part of a technology team or a product development team. They might be in sales, they might be in marketing, or another part of the business, and like, you know, key stakeholders that have an interest in this stuff, but they perhaps don't want the nitty gritty of all the detail. But if a group of charters, like the output of a group of charters, can be summarized into a story, and it's like, okay, this is you've called this stuff out for this reason, and here's the reason why you've called it out as a problem, or some ideas that you may have about this particular feature set. It feels much more conversational than just saying 20 steps passed and 2 failed. And it's like, okay, well, what does that really mean? Like,
exactly, yeah. But it becomes a numbers exercise.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
But there is I suppose the interesting thing with exploratory testing, and I know I've mentioned it sitting alongside Gherkin in regards to certainly how our kind of view of our general where we're heading, is that exploratory testing is great on its own, but coupling it up with test automation as well is also quite an interesting thing to look at, in that you have things that you want to automate. So you've got your when you have a feature and are looking at what you can automate and what you can't automate. So you have so if you're doing feature testing, you have Gherkin, and you're going to run that manually to prove that the core of it works, and then you're going to have that's going to get implemented in an automated test because that's a good thing.
Yes.
And you have your exploratory test sat alongside it to cover for the things that either aren't considered core enough to want to write Gherkin for in order to automate, or for things that you're just not ready to automate, or to cover edge cases as well. So you may use exploratory testing to look at accessibility, for example. I'm not saying that you can't automate accessibility at all. But if you're wanting to get a look at it and to explore that as an area of the feature that you're developing for, say, a particular feature, that's quite a nice way in. The same thing with cross-browser testing. You may think, well, yes, but you could automate that. Yes, again, you can automate lots of things. The thing with exploratory testing is that you are using your tester's instinct to test something. We must remember that the whole manual versus automation conversation that's been going since automation tests were a thing is automated tests are great for checking stuff. Testers and QAs are great for testing stuff.
Yeah.
If there are things that you always want to check works, that's fine. There's your automation. For using your skills and your experience and your questions that you naturally have as a tester, you can. That's where exploratory testing is really good, because you could just ask, as in your charters, you can ask a series of questions that you're going to seek answers to, and that could be things like, so what's the impact of this feature on accessibility? Or what does this look like in the Chrome version of Edge? Or I've got this weird suspicion about this particular Edge case. I'm going to create a test chart to go and look at that, because as a tester, that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a place for both, but I think that when it comes to actually testing things, that's where exploratory testing really, really helps, because it allows you, as we said, to focus in on specific aspects that an automated check wouldn't necessarily pick up on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you could dive into that. You can dive into that area, as you said, in detail, and just pull out the information that you want to to prove or disprove either that, yes, I was right, I thought there was risk here, and there we go, or actually goes, well, actually, like all good theories, it's always at the mercy of being disproved, and I've managed to disprove my own theory, so that's great as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
No risk here, we can move on, and I'll go and look at something else. Yes, but yes, there's no risk here, but whilst I was there's this other thing. Right, we'll go and have a look at that now while we're.
Yeah. It's great, and that kind of that process of revealing useful information in unison with putting together automated checks, and particularly with Gherkin syntax, the kind of given when then, it makes things very explicit and really
Yes,
encourages just making things as clear as they can be in an
absolutely.
explicit form that you can assert against.
Mm.
And and like that stuff, giving you the confidence of the core, the essentials of that particular feature, for example. And I love the way you described it with exploratory testing, the concept of just asking a series of questions. I love that approach. I'm a big fan of that approach myself, where I'll tee up a session and I will capture, right, these are the questions that I want to try and answer within this 30-minute time frame.
Mm.
And I use them to trigger my test ideas. They're not written as test cases, they're written as a question. Like, what happens if I do this? Or when I do that, what does it look like? And I find that is really like a nice way of giving you enough focus, but not just saying do this, do this, do this, do this. And I always enjoy, even if I'm mid session and I get stuck and I'm like, okay, where should I focus now? I could do this, could do that. I like look back at those questions and use them to go, oh yeah, I don't think I've answered enough of that question yet. I'll go and try and answer it and then do whatever I need to do off the back of that question. So yeah, big fan of using a set of questions for a time boxed session. Really powerful
Mm.
stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree with you more.
And thinking about time boxing actually. Yeah, what are there kind of? I'd be curious to kind of get your thoughts on like the pros and cons of time boxing and how that's connected to exploratory testing.
So that's an interesting one. The the general standard is half an hour,
Mm.
and sometimes I think that that can work in your favour, and that's great. But there's also potentially within some software that actually you've got setup to consider. You have waiting for an output or a triggered output to consider. If you're testing, when does it run? You've almost got to remember, if you're doing it strictly, you would spend all the time that you want to spend in terms of setting the scenario up. Pause your session and
Yeah.
then come back to it at the point that it's actually supposed to have run, which I'm guessing also has a risk of a potential loss of focus, because I was doing this thing and then I had to stop because otherwise, well, that's not half an hour, is it? And then I've got to go off and do this other thing. So
Mm.
I'm going to get another exploratory test going. But I've got to keep in the back of my mind, I've got to come back to this other thing, which is going to run at this specific time. Right. So I've got to remember to stop here and then go back to this. So I think if you're dealing with if you're dealing with something that is just, you're going to do it and you're just going to plow through and you have a half an hour time box, that's fine. But you do need to consider setup on top of that. So one thing that we look at is that, sure, you've got setup and you've actually then got your execution. So actually 30 minutes actually can be more like 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how much time you actually need in order to get your scenarios right or do any pre-configuration that you need to do. So there's that, but then there's also I'm going to have to stop this. I'm going to have to remember to come back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I guess there's elapsed versus paused, and I guess there's a potential there for is it just easily mitigatable in terms of, well, yeah, you just keep going and it's fine. If you have to wait another 10 minutes in order to then get your output out, well, okay.
Yeah.
Versus I'm going to have to stop this and remember to come back to it because I'm expecting it to run at this particular time, even if you've got something that runs to the nearest 5 minutes, you've still got to remember to come back 5 minutes later and then go, aha, right, yes, it will have run now. So
yeah. No, it's the trickier side of time boxing for sure, and particularly when I find when I run an exploratory testing session, like I hit go, and I use a timer and just that sort of telling me when to stop as well. I find interesting because like sometimes you're in like, oh yeah, but I've just discovered this thing and my timer's gone off and I'm like, you're saying I should stop because I should then go and debrief with someone else and summarize my notes and then go and have a conversation with someone about what I discovered. But I've just found this exciting thing, and like if that happens just at the point where the timer is going to stop, you're like,
absolutely,
am I disciplined enough to stop and then create another charter for that thing? And there's moments I think back on my career where I'll go, I'll just give it another 15 minutes, end up like an hour later going, I shouldn't have done that. I should have stopped, then summarized, and then gone and had the conversation. Because what I find interesting, if an exploratory testing session for me is too long, I've probably captured so much that it's probably a bit of a disservice to the person or persons that I'm then sharing with, because I'm like, hey, look at everything, like all of this stuff that I've captured. And the smaller time sessions, I find it's like, this was it, and that starts a conversation about that particular, 3 or 4 important things. And it's easier to then have a conversation about it. Things perhaps don't get missed. And you're not overwhelming your audience. And I think as, excuse me, testing professionals, we owe a service to the colleagues that we work with, not to overwhelm them with information, because it's very easy, I think, for us to get excited about things that we find and ideas we have and more questions and more things that we could test. And it might be quite overwhelming for some people to be on the receiving end of that information. So time box, I think, really helps to go just focus the amount of information you can gather in that amount of time, and that's good enough. Again, we can always run another session.
Absolutely. I think there is something to be said for distilling the things that you find in that session down to, I sought out to prove these things. Here is what I found on these things. Whilst I was doing these things, I thought of some questions. So I'm going to expose these questions, and we're going to have a conversation about these, because I was thinking, are these things we need to be worried about? Are these things we need to look into? Are they future iterations? So we're going to call these out as well, because it's not necessarily just about proving does a particular feature work or not, does it look nice, but you've also got, I found something that wasn't quite right, or I had to press like 10 button clicks to get to this page. Can we do something about that?
Yeah.
So there's a usability kind of feedback. Or whilst we were doing this, I really thought it would be great if we had another page that showed this information, or can we have a toggleable view?
Yeah.
Or some other kind of idea that sprang up that nobody necessarily may have considered. And that's part of the this process of feeding back as well. It's not just sinking out to prove, are we good here? You've also got, we're good, but I came up with these ideas as well.
I love that, and I think that's such an important part of exploratory testing, which is, I think, is often missed when it comes to like a stepped approach, where you're just like check. I've experienced it myself, and I've experienced it with other testers I've worked with, where they feel like they aren't allowed a voice. That's someone else's opinion. I can't share my opinion on the product. I'm just testing this stuff. And it's like, no way. Everyone on a team should be able to share their thoughts on whatever it is they're testing. They could they could use their oracles to say, I believe this is a problem because of this requirement, or this conversation I had with this engineer over here, and here's my thoughts, here's my opinions. And I really encourage us as testers to feel confident to have an opinion. We may not be a particular expert on that opinion, and that's fine, but we're sharing our view on something based on what we've discovered. And I think the challenge is often where I see it not work, where we blur the line between I think we should do this, and I found this problem, and describing it in a way that makes the recipient feel like, oh, are you telling me how to do my job? And it's, so I think it's a real skill to be able to share with someone an idea and to set it as, hey, this is I've experienced this. I think it would be useful if this. Would you be open to discussing this, or would you be up for a chat about this idea? Like inviting people to the idea instead of saying, oh, this is not so good, we should do this. Like I know there's two extreme examples, but I feel it's a real technique that testers can develop about how they suggest ideas, and they should absolutely share their opinion. I feel
we have to remember that as testers, we're the first people, or some of the first people, to actively use software before it goes anywhere near our customers. So we're in a really great position to have a look at what this feature is doing and how it relates to other features that sit in the same area, and actually go, yeah, this slots in really nicely. I can totally see where we get from here, and now we're utilizing this bit, and I can see where we're going here. As well as, okay, so I can see where we're going here, and this particular feature is great, but wouldn't it be nice if we had this other thing, or this other configurable or feature flags element to it that would allow us to serve potentially a slightly different use case. I mean, we're talking here about how we're feeding that information back, and I think it's really interesting that because we get to use the software every single day, and we're testing, and we're obviously developing opinions about how it looks, how it works, and we should be able, you're right, to feed that back into the conversation and look at areas where, does it have to be radio buttons? Could we do toggles, or do we really need to expose this level of complexity at all? Can we hide this away? Does every user need to see this? Can we move some of it away, or hide the complexity somehow to make it, yes, it's a complicated bit of software, but can we make it look more simple to use, because we're burying the complexity underneath that? Yeah, we know it's there and we know it's doing this, but we're making it complicated there so it can basically so it can be really usable and really easy to use, on the surface. You could, yeah,
absolutely. It's that, over time, the way you described it, as a tester, we build up a more overall picture of how things piece together, and therefore that can inform our ideas. And certainly thinking in terms of consistency across different parts of an application, we'll get a sense of if things are consistent or are leaning away from consistency. I think that's really powerful. And again, that feels like it can come from, or I've experienced it where it comes from running different types of exploratory testing sessions or charters, over time, building up that knowledge. It feels like the output of another benefit of exploratory testing is the knowledge of a product grows not just with the tester, but if they are the person predominantly running exploratory testing, but with the rest of the team, because that kind of what that test has exposed, that information that they've revealed, naturally sort of seeps out to the rest of the teams. And you know, a certain individual in a team maybe just focus on a particular area of a feature and are just developing this thing, but they will then start to, I feel, get a sense of other stuff that's going on through, you know, good testing notes and good conversations about what a tester has discovered. I think it reveals, it kind of levels up. What I'm getting at, I think, is it levels up a whole team's knowledge of their particular product that they're working on.
No, absolutely. Especially in areas that they're not necessarily so knowledgeable about. I remember a feature that I was testing where we were relying on or utilizing something else that was feeding into what the bit that we were developing. And I was encountering problems, and I went away and had a chat with the team that was responsible for the bit that I had to use to make sure our bit worked, and uncovered a load of information that the rest of the team and the product owner were really quite grateful for having, because it exposed, I guess, oh, right, so that's how that bit's working, and the logic that they're implementing and how it's actually feeding through. So that was really interesting, that as the person doing the testing, that I had to get, I went out and found out about how this other bit worked, and then through me using it and then presented it out, you know, as I was doing my stuff. And yeah, that was really good. And everybody had a better understanding of what the current state of play was as a result, which is great, because, you know, we're proving a feature works and we're doing knowledge sharing, and the exploratory, and all through exploring the feature with the charter that I put out, which is kind of what it was all about, really.
I love that kind of, that concept of knowledge share is an essential outcome of good exploratory testing. It really is, and that's so cool that happened. So that's a brilliant, like, you know, brilliant case that to kind of say, this is also what exploratory testing can do. It will level up the knowledge that your team has of the products and services that you're building. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Al, I've just had a look at the time, and I can't believe
I know.
we are nearly out of time.
We are very nearly out of time. It's great.
This has been a wonderful chat, and I'm super grateful for your time.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I feel like let's chat some more. But yeah, we set ourselves a time box, and we've stuck to it. So I think we must honor the time boxing, seeing as we've been talking about it.
The time box.
But yeah, I'm really grateful for the chat today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, thank you so much for everything you shared today, and yeah, let's keep the conversation going. And I think, you know, I love what you shared, and looking forward to having more conversations like this in the future.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Simon.
All right, take care, Al. See you soon.
See you.
Thanks for watching. If you found that interesting, do go ahead and like the video, and feel free to subscribe and share. We'll see you next time, and keep exploring.